Welcome to Cooper and Cary Have Words. My name is James Cary. As you can see from the absurdly positioned sign above my head, I live in Yeovil, which is in Somerset in the south of England, and 4,000 miles away in a chilly Florida, I believe, is my friend Barry Cooper. Hello. Is it chilly in Florida? I didn't know it got chilly.
No, it's absolutely freezing. But it's great for the manatee population. They've come inland, and there's about 500 of them currently situated about 5 miles from where I'm currently sitting. So hopefully we won't be invaded by them at any point, but we're going to see them later on this afternoon. It's one of the perks of living in Florida. But with us,
what is a manatee? Can you just paint a picture
it's a
for
sea
us?
cow. If you look at it, want to look it up in your ESV, I think it might be translated sea cow. They're basically great big floating sofas, and if you go and see them in a zoo, they quite often just float helplessly towards the glass and then bounce off the glass with their noses back into the tank. That's kind of what their main spiritual gift, I would say. But I love them. I'm a big fan of
the front end is the hippo, and the back end is like a beaver, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. It's quite a significant back end. I would stay well clear if I were you. But
okay.
They're quite unwieldy looking creatures, but sort of gorgeous in their helpless way.
But anyway, enough of manatees and the flora and fauna of Florida. We have a special guest with us, who I believe is not far from the town of Greenwich in London. Is that right, Andrew?
I'm in the town of Greenwich.
Excellent.
In fact, I think
my favourite thing about Greenwich is it's described by Ricky Gervais in his early career. I remember him saying, Greenwich Mean Time, that's the time it actually is. Which I just think is... it's sort of completely wrong, and yet you sort of know what he means. But anyway, Andrew, you are in the town where it actually is. Barry, do you have an introduction for Andrew? You're the sort of person that does.
I think you know Andrew a bit better than me. My first contact with Andrew, I think, was when he was preaching at St Helens, and I've heard him preach there a few times. But you know him a bit better than me, James, so roll out the red carpet.
Andrew is a pastor and theologian. I believe you've co-written a book with a previous guest on this show, Steve Jeffrey, Peers for Our Transgressions, and you have a new book out which we're coming to in a moment. But do you want to just tell us a little bit about who you are, your story, what business you have in the town of Greenwich in London?
So my claim to fame is that the Greenwich meridian, 0 degrees longitude, actually goes through my house. I think it's about
Whoa!
there.
No way.
So
do you have a plan?
I think I'm in it. I actually want to work out exactly where it is and have a painted line on the carpet, but I haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
It's a strong move. So you're a pastor of a particular denomination in Greenwich?
Yeah, I'm a pastor of an Anglican church called Grace Church Greenwich, which is a church plant 6 and a bit years old. And I am part-time tutor on the Cornhill training course, which is a course that tries to equip preachers and teachers. So I do half and half. And then from time to time I've written books with friends. I don't write books on my own because that doesn't really work, but John and I have got the same sense of humour, and we've done a couple of projects together, so this is the latest one.
You know, I've done a few...
So who is John, and what's the book?
John is John Gemmell, married to Aileen. He lives up in Edinburgh and is now the leader of Cornhill, Scotland. But we used to work together in London, and the book is called Are You 100% Sure You Want to Be an Agnostic?
I see what you've done there about the certainty. That's good. Well, I did a bit of, contrary to popular belief, I did a bit of research before the recording of a podcast, and there was a Pew Research, what do they call it? A survey, that's the word I'm looking for. This is in 2021, so last year, in the US, roughly 3 in 10 adults are now religiously unaffiliated. So that's the term they use for atheists, agnostics, or people who say, well, I'm nothing in particular. Roughly 6 out of 10 identifying as Christian. So apparently agnostics are up from 3% to 5% in the last 10 years, roughly double. Andrew, do you have any theories about, what do you put that down to? Why do you think that agnostics seem to be growing as a demographic group?
Yeah, and I think probably a lot bigger than what it was, you said 5 or 6%. I mean, a lot of people are agnostics without knowing the word, but, I think it just sounds quite humble, doesn't it, to say I don't know. I mean, agnostic just means I don't know. And in our culture, we're quite suspicious of people being too certain, because certain people are sure they're right and everyone else is wrong, which is arrogant. certain people get into fights with other people who are certain, so it causes wars. And wouldn't it just be better, we'd be more humble, we'd be more peaceable if we just said, I'm not saying anyone's got it totally right, no one's got it totally wrong, I'm sort of open-minded. I think it kind of fits with the spirit of the age, and the fence has never been such a comfortable place to sit.
Definitely. I mean, why are you writing this book now?
I think this is where a lot of my friends are. So, a few years ago, maybe you had a book on did Jesus rise from the dead? And there was lots of evidence and facts and, arguments like that. But now most of my friends think, I just don't really care if he raised from the dead. I'm not interested in the facts because I don't know that they matter. And so we're kind of starting a bit further back. It's a kind of book aimed at the people that I know. And their attitude to religious questions is not, it's partly that they don't know, partly that they don't care, but I think also partly there's a kind of wariness that if you got sucked into Christianity, it would destroy your life. And I can relate to that because that was my feeling at university. I thought, Jesus might just be God, but I really would rather not open that can of worms, because if there's a God, it might change my life, and then I'll have to watch songs of praise. And there's just this fear that in the book, actually, I give an illustration. One of my friends said that he was very surprised to read of Jesus turning water into wine. And it wasn't the miracle that surprised him, although, H2O to C2H5OH can't be done in a chemistry lab. It was the fact that Jesus wouldn't go around instead turning all the wine into water. That was his expectation of God, that his greatest fear would be that somebody somewhere might be having fun. And, I think that was my fear. That's a lot of people's fear. And so we just want to keep God at arm's length. And to say, I don't know, it's kind of the easiest way to do it. To be atheist is to be a bit too dogmatic. But to sit somewhere in the middle, it kind of keeps it out of your life, out of your hair, and you get to avoid it. So the challenge of the book was partly to convince people that you could be sure about Jesus, but also to persuade people that you'd want to be, as in he's got something to offer that will be really great.
And would you say there are different types of agnostic then? Are there sort of subcategories of agnostic? Are there some people who are sort of, as it were, hardcore agnostic and are absolutely sure that you could never be sure, but some people who are a bit more sort of open to persuasion?
What do we want? Don't know. When do we want it? Not sure.
Whenever you like. Yeah. Has that been your experience pastorally as you talk to your agnostic friends, that there's sort of different subdivisions maybe?
Yeah, I mean you can be agnostic just because you haven't looked into something. So John says in the book he's agnostic about how many helium balloons it would take for his wife Aileen to fly, and it would be easy to find out. Just tie her to one and see if she gets into orbit, and then try two. But she's scared of heights and doesn't seem very kind to find out. So some people are agnostic about Jesus because they've just never looked into him at all, and it'd be quite easy to know, but they just don't know. As you say, other people are kind of more absolute agnostics. I can't know. But when you think about it a moment, that's kind of ironic because they're not very agnostic about their own agnosticism. I know that you can't know. And actually, to say I know there is no compelling evidence for God would be a bit like saying I know that there's no treasure hidden in Leicestershire. How could you know that? You'd have to have dug everywhere. What if there was a gold ingot hidden in a field somewhere that you hadn't dug up, or a diamond necklace in a detergent bottle in a postcode that the police hadn't checked? And let's face it, the University of Leicester...
Or a king under a car park.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think it's not actually a coherent philosophical position to be dogmatically agnostic. So there's the I don't know, I haven't looked into it. There's the I can't know, although that doesn't make sense. But then for most people, it's just I don't really want to know. And as I say, that's the challenge of persuading people that Jesus is offering life and joy and meaning, and it's really good news, as well as that it's based on evidence and we can be sure about it.
Now, you describe yourself as an agnostic in the book, or a former agnostic. What type of agnostic were you? Were you the sort of hardcore, and then Jesus got in there with a sledgehammer and broke you, or what happened?
So I grew up with some connection with church. I joined a church choir when I was 9 because my piano teacher was in it, and I liked music, and I sang with a high-pitched voice and a little frilly collar for a few years. Then my voice broke, and I was pretty disillusioned as a late teenager with religion. I asked the local vicar some serious questions that I had, and he sort of brushed them off. And so I had friends into all sorts of things. I had a friend who was a Quaker, it's kind of pantheist. I had other friends who were atheists. I went up to university to read natural sciences, and Richard Dawkins, the atheist, was on the reading list, and I read that and was kind of convinced by that. So I didn't really know what I thought. I met some real Christians in my first week at university. And I say real Christians. I'd met churchgoers before, but I hadn't met people whose lives were shaped by the teaching of Jesus. And I found them quite compelling and also quite intimidating, because I thought the stakes are high. Like, if you're actually asking me if this is true, and if it's true, I have to give my life to it. And as I say, that's what began my strategy of the fence is the safest place to sit, and I'll try and keep these questions at bay. And I'd say God was very patient with me. I wasn't really looking into it. In fact, that's one of the things we talk about. Jesus has this image of a good shepherd who goes looking for lost sheep. And I think our paradigm is often we're the sheep that's looking for the shepherd, and the shepherd's gone hiding. You know, why is God playing so hard to get? Where's he sneakily hiding? And that certainly wasn't true of me. I was not a sheep looking for a shepherd. I was a sheep hiding from a shepherd. And God was very persistent in going after me.
Having said that, I always feel that Jesus is inviting people to lean in. And particularly in my experience, I've been doing a lot of thinking about particularly the first half of John's Gospel, and how one commentator described him as the Scarlet Pimpernel. And he sort of said, the moments where he says something, he's about to be stoned, and they're, oh, he's gone. Oh, I had a really good rock ready to throw. And the number of times he just sort of slipped through their fingers, and he heals people. You know, he heals the paralysed man at the pool of Bethesda. And they said, "Who did this to you?" And he said, "I don't know." So what an extraordinary thing. In terms of building brand awareness, Jesus was pretty hopeless in John, at least. And I always feel that, and, you know, the parables, of which there aren't any in John, but the parables cause you to think, oh, I get it. Oh, actually, I don't think I do get it. Oh, hang on. What is this? And it gives you something to think about and chew on. So it feels like, you know, bridge building. We're building a bridge from both ends, or from the middle outwards. I don't quite know how the bridge is working in this dynamic. But that's kind of true, isn't it? That Jesus, in one sense, couldn't make himself clearer. At the end of John 1, before the water into wine, he says, the heavens are opening and, you know, angels ascending and descending. This is the moment where, where Jacob says, the Lord is in this place and I didn't know it. And so it's like, it's pretty obvious. And yet, it's also not obvious. How do we know with whom to be obvious and whom not to be obvious, if you see what I mean?
There's that amazing verse in John 7 where Jesus says, if anyone's will is to do God's will, then he'll know whether my teaching is from God. And in other words, you're not going to be able to evaluate this without being willing to change your life and to find out what God is about. And yeah, as you say, Jesus deliberately withdraws sometimes from the Pharisees and the religious teachers, but those who humbly seek him, he lets them find him. I mean, we talk about the healing of the blind man in John chapter 9 in the book, and I love that episode because, as you say, like the Scarlet Pimpernel, Jesus appears, heals this man, disappears, and then the whole chapter is the blind man trying to figure out what's happened to him, actually cross-examined by the Pharisees who've already decided to reject Jesus, and they're they've drawn the conclusion before they look at the evidence and then try and bully him into saying what they want. And actually, ironically, it's the hostile questions of the opponents that causes the man to realise, hang on a minute, Jesus, he must be from God if he's just done this. And he's opened my eyes. And then right at the end of the chapter, he meets Jesus and he worships him.
It's my favourite chapter of Scripture. And it's kind of, as you say, it's weird because Jesus isn't in most of it. The middle section is them sort of saying, this man whom you say was blind, tell us again? Oh, wow, I've told you. You seem really interested in Jesus. Oh, you want to be his disciples too? No, we do not. But also, the thing that's amazing from a literary point of view and is how Jesus changes water into wine. 11 verses. The most famous miracle in the Bible. Here you go. Done. Man born blind. Whole of chapter 9. 43 verses? Something like that. It's a lot, isn't it? And so in a way we can just see that development throughout the story, don't we? And I think it always feels to me like sometimes, as evangelicals particularly, we're just trying to come up with the right formula or form of words where we just go from 0 to 0, the light goes on, that they've gone from darkness into light, and we're not really into the grey or the twilight, and yet that's just not how conversion seems to work in the New Testament, is it?
There's a lot of twilight, isn't it? There's a lot of it slowly dawning on somebody. And even the disciples kind of aren't really disciples, as in they don't really follow Jesus very closely for quite a long time, and he's patient with them. And I mean, that's certainly my experience.
John 6, where they say, this is really hard teaching. I'm not sure about this. So are you off then? Yeah. It's like, and so they left, and he sort of left with the 12. Are you going to leave too? And they're like, well.
Yeah, and also
to whom shall we go?
Jesus doesn't stop them and say, "Hang on, guys, you've misread that. That's not actually what I meant. Come back." So it's like, all right, don't let the door hit you on the way out. You know, it's amazing.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, how can we? But there's so much other scripture to bear in mind. How can we do our evangelistic endeavours in a Jesus-shaped way, as opposed, as well as a Jesus-centred way? We want to.
Do you think we're just a bit overkeen, James? A bit overkeen with our evangelism sometimes, that we just want to sort of, don't go. I've got this other brilliant reason. It's like, no, okay, well maybe we just need to be a bit more open-handed. Is that what you mean? What you're thinking?
Well, yeah, maybe, because maybe that's, and it partly depends on you and what. Your own tone and situation and the person you're speaking to.
Definitely, and the person you're speaking to. Yeah. So, but then it's that thing of how do you gauge that? Not being gifted with omniscience, and being able to see into people's hearts. But what do you think on that, Sachi? Do you get a sense sometimes when you're talking to someone, okay, this is a pearls before swine situation, I'm going to back off, or do you always assume, I don't know how to put it, assume more generously that maybe if you just push a bit further, keep going, they might sort of turn around and suddenly, the light will dawn. How do you approach that as, doing the work of evangelism?
I think when I was a young Christian, I used to download. So people would ask, one question about, oh, you went to church on Sunday. And I thought, this is it. This is the opportunity. And then I'd start into my sermon with, the entire Christian worldview downloaded in one go, and their eyes would glaze over. I think now I've tried to just trust God more, that if God's at work in somebody, they'll be intrigued and they might actually want to know. And so I don't have to say everything. I just say one thing, and then maybe they ask more. And it always surprises me when people do want to know more. I just assume they'll switch off. But, you say something and they say, oh, tell me more about this. And I think that they actually want to know. So I think it's partly a trust that the gospel really is at work and that God's drawing some people to himself, but we don't have to force it. I remember being with an older Christian on a train once, and we got chatting to the person next to us, and he just kept dropping in sort of provocative things that were an invitation to talk more if they wanted to. So I think he said, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a vicar. So sometimes I get really people ready for their funeral. Makes you think, doesn't it? What will be said at your funeral? And then he'd just leave it and then change the subject. And if they wanted to pick it up, they could. But he didn't sort of do a sermon about death and resurrection. But it was ready if they grabbed it.
That's good.
And did they?
They did the first time, and then they dropped it, and he dropped it, and it wasn't forced. And I thought that's much better. It's much more likely that they'll risk a conversation with a Christian the next time, because it was a little mouthful rather than it wasn't indigestible.
Just met a newly converted Andy Sach.
Yeah.
James and I have talked quite a bit on the podcast with about the idea of asking questions in evangelism. We've had Randy Newman on talking about question evangelism, which I think is probably, it's one of the few books that James and I really agree on as being one of the best ever. And that idea of, okay, rich young man, Mark chapter 10 says, what must I do to be saved? What must I do to inherit eternal life? And then most of us instinctively as Christians, if we got that question, immediately wanting to go, okay, bosh, 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 here's, 2 ways to live, or whatever it is. And Jesus responding with, why do you call me good? Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Why do you call me good? So again, that strikes me as one of those provocative questions. Why do you call me good? Oh, you've made that assumption. What do you think some of the...
And certainly my own conversion, I think I was realising that Jesus was good and that the Christian worldview made sense, but at the same time I was realising that I was bad and that atheism didn't make sense. So it was a kind of push factor and a pull factor that I thought, okay, I don't know if I want to stand with Jesus, but where else am I going to stand? Because I don't currently have any foundations for my life. And I really think that now, if I ever doubt or am tempted to give up, I think, well, where would I go to from Jesus? Because atheism really doesn't make sense of anything that I care about or stand for. If I'm going to run my life instead of Jesus, I don't run it very well. And so I think that partly that self-doubt in your atheism, as well as the invitation to follow Jesus, they go together.
Can I make a suggestion that, Andrew, I think you're weird? And what I mean by that is you're a natural scientist at university, and you are deducing various truths about the world around you and things. Whereas Jonathan Haidt would say, well, we kind of make up our mind emotionally, and then we will rationalise anything you like after the facts. And the smarter you are, the better you are at rationalising whatever ludicrous or prejudiced view you may have. What I find often within my own tribe of conservative evangelicals is that there's a lot of super smart people who look at the world and observe the Christian doctrine and say, Jesus is good, I'm not, therefore this, that must mean this, therefore I do this. Whereas I don't think that's normal. And so we've got quite hung up on apologetics, about trying to persuade people, winning arguments. And actually, I don't know if it was ever true that was the majority way of becoming a Christian, but it feels even less true now, I think. Is that fair? And please defend yourself if you don't think you're weird, but I think I'm onto something there.
Yeah, I think it's both. Like, as I say, in my own conversion, I think I got convinced Christianity was true before I got convinced it was good. And being true and not good was not enough. So I was hiding from Jesus because I thought he wants to wreck my life. And the thing that made the difference was realizing if he loved me and gave himself for me, he wouldn't do that in order to destroy me. It's kind of obvious, but so coming to trust Jesus. I mean, in a relationship, you don't just want to know facts about somebody; you want to know what they're actually like. And so that came second. But I think I wasn't emotionally drawn to Christianity at first because I enjoyed my autonomy and I was living a life as a non-Christian, but it was going okay, and I think I got bothered by facts and the fact that as an atheist, a atheist and then an agnostic, sort of somewhere in between, I couldn't really give an account for what is my life for. I remember having a conversation with somebody at university with a non-Christian friend about why does it matter if we get up tomorrow? And neither of us could think of an answer. And it wasn't that we were depressed. We weren't saying, I can't see the point of tomorrow, but we just couldn't give any grounds for why it counted. And I was bothered by that. And meanwhile, here are these Christians, and they did know why they got up tomorrow, and they believed in a God who made them and a future he had for them. And I thought it kind of matters what's true. And so I was bothered by truth, but then as I started to think it might be true, I then was hiding from it. So for me, it was both. I needed to know this is actually real. It actually makes sense of the universe, but also it's good, and I don't have to hide. And it was both those things.
What was were there particular things, do you remember a moment when you suddenly realised that God is good? Were there particular things that happened to you or things that you read where you thought, oh, he really is just wonderful, glorious, kind, gentle, all of those things?
I think it was two things. It was Jesus and it was his people. So I met some Christians in my college, and one of them was quite socially awkward. And I know how you deal with socially awkward people. I mean, I had experience of this at school. You ostracize them, you don't talk to them, and then when they're not there, you talk about them. And that, that's just standard. It's what everyone does. And the Christians didn't do that. When he was there, they were really patient with him. And when he wasn't there, they spoke well of him. And I thought, that's weird. But I suddenly realised that that's actually very attractive, because that means when I'm not there, they're not talking about me either, or they're speaking well of me. And it was the integrity of that life transformed by Jesus that really struck me. I think also, I thought Christians were sad because they were missing out on all sorts of things, I thought. But over the years, I've looked at Christians and I thought, actually, they've lived well. And the people that I thought were so free and liberated have really hurt their lives and hurt other people. And the Christians that I thought were being sad by following Jesus have blessed other people. So it's partly that. And then the other thing was just looking at the Lord Jesus. And yes, he was dogmatic, but he was dogmatic with humility. I mean, how do you combine that? We're not very good at combining certainty and humility. The people who are certain are really full of themselves. Jesus was very sure. I mean, he wasn't an agnostic character. He's not an agnostic character. But he managed to assert truth with real gentleness and tenderness. And that was compelling. And yeah, I suppose ultimately it was his death on the cross. Like, he paid the ultimate sacrifice because he cared about rescuing people. He cared about a blank slate for me, a forgiveness from all the past, the possibility of relationship with God. I just thought, I can't square that with somebody who has evil intent. So yeah, it was a combination of Jesus and his people.
In our current era, the expression that's bandied around and has been for the last 10 or 15 years is moralistic therapeutic deism. Have you come across that as I believe it was sociologist Christian Smith and Melinda Lundquist Denton sort of said that that's what teenagers believe, but this is 2005, I think. So these are all adults now. Because it's a very... And I think it is a good description of the spirit of the age in the West, at least, which is, I mean, wow, times couldn't be any more moralistic than they are now. Mm-hmm. Therapeutic is very much about how I feel. And the deism does, to some extent, encapsulate the fact that very few people are keen to say there is no God. I know there is no God, and anyone who thinks there is a God is an idiot. They've been deceived. They're weak, or whatever it is. That's still quite a rare position to take. So how do we speak into that an age which really has hook, line, and sinker gone for this moralistic thing? Because how I feel is super important, but also what you think and how moral you are seems to matter to people more than ever as well. I don't know. How do we speak into that kind of a culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think I made the mistake of thinking only Christians want to be moral, and of course that's nonsense. Before as a Christian, I wanted to be a good person, and in particular, I wanted to be thought of as a good person. So there's nothing unique about Christians for that. But I think I realised that I didn't achieve that. So in particular, the Bible tells us to honour our father and our mother, but as a non-Christian, I wanted to treat my parents well, but I often treated my mum quite badly, and I think it's because her love was unconditional, and so I could get away with being rude or impatient or selfish, and I often did, but afterwards I felt bad about it. And it's just a little example, but I often regretted that, and I couldn't do the good that I knew that I wanted to do. And I think as a non-Christian, you just don't have anything to do. There's nowhere to go with that, with moral failure. You just have to tell yourself, but you're a good guy, really, and it wasn't that bad what you said to your mum, or you just sort of try to persuade yourself that you're good, even though your conscience says that you're bad. And I think I've noticed that with Christians now, that the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian in the office isn't that the Christian gets it right all the time. It's just that when the Christian gets it wrong, they could admit that they got it wrong. We don't have to pretend that we were right. So you can say, I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. What I did was quite selfish. And I think sort of to own up to stuff is a mark of God's work in you. We're not pretending. So I find that a great change about the gospel. It wasn't that I suddenly became better in every area, but I could be honest about the fact that I'd been bad.